Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Macy Peralt, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Amy Bagwell. In today's episode, we're talking with Ashley Mitchell about expectant mother expenses. Ashley is a birth mom. She placed her son 13 years ago. She's also a wife, mother of 2 more children that she parents, and the founder of Lifetime Healing. Let's dive into the conversation.
Okay, Ashley, welcome back to the show. You were our very first guest, so this is fun to get to be together again. Unfortunately, we're not all actually together, but, together on the internet, so it kind of counts.
Yes, I was just thinking this would be so much better if we were knee to knee right now.
Yeah,
I
totally
know.
agree. Totally agree. Well, okay, so Macy mentioned this, but we're going to be talking about expectant mother expenses. So we wanted to just start off by sharing what the basics of expectant mother expenses entail. So to give you a little background, in private or independent adoptions where an expectant mother is making a plan to place her baby for adoption, the hopeful adoptive parents may pay some of the expectant mother expenses. That doesn't always happen, but sometimes it happens. So it's definitely a situation-to-situation kind of thing. Those expenses, they can include things like maternity-related medical and hospital costs, living expenses like rent, utility, etc., during her pregnancy and post-placement for a certain amount of time. It could include counseling fees, attorney and legal fees, and things of the sort. So some agencies require the mom to be at a certain point in her pregnancy before she can have access to the financial assistance, and birth moms can typically receive financial help for 6 to 8-ish weeks, kind of depending on what state they're in, and if they've had a natural delivery or a C-section. Different states have different laws, so you would obviously need to check with your local agency or attorney on what that would look like. Also, some states might have a monthly cap, and others could have a cap for total expenses allowed throughout the entirety of the pregnancy and postpartum period. So, again, we encourage you to reach out to an attorney in your state for detailed breakdowns if you need them, because we will speak to that somewhat in this podcast, but obviously those can change with time, so always check back on what's accurate and don't always take our word for things. So anyway, let's jump in. Ashley, we know that you work with lots of agencies across the country, really. And so you have a lot of knowledge about this. So I know lots of people have, follow you or know you, but for those who don't, would you just briefly explain a little bit of who you are and what exactly Lifetime Healing does?
Yes, I am so glad to be having this conversation. This comes up so much. I want people to know that having money conversations in any situation is uncomfortable and typically inappropriate when we want to talk about your bank account. And when you bring it to the table in an emotionally charged conversation about adoption, it can get pretty heated. So I just want everyone to take a breath. We're gonna figure this out together.
Yes.
But this gets really complicated. And because money, unfortunately, is a huge part of adoption, we need to talk about it so that you can be prepared to do this better. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ashley Mitchell. I'm a birth mother in an open adoption. I placed my son, Derek, 13 years ago.
Wow.
He'll be actually 14 in the spring, which is so crazy. So we've been at the education game for a while. After several years of closed adoption and so much painful self-destruction behavior because of grief and trauma that was never addressed in my personal situation, we saw such a desperate need for post-placement care for the birth mothers. And so me and a very small team wrote the nation's very first curriculum and training for the professionals on why they needed to implement post-placement care and how to put together peer-led support groups so that women around the country, no matter when they placed or who they placed with, could get free support so that mental health became a standard in adoption ethics and not a luxury if you didn't have insurance to cover therapy. And so that's a little bit about what we're doing. We've been at this a while. I would definitely not call me a professional in any sense of the word, but we definitely have heard a lot. So we are definitely here to just open this conversation up. I do want to put a disclaimer in this. I did not take any money for as far as expectant parent expenses. So when I was pregnant and went to the agency that I worked with, I was in the state of Utah. They were offered to me and I did not take them. I was 25 when no, 26, excuse me, when I first walked into an agency. And I just want to just put this out there that there is a large community of birth mothers that didn't take the expenses. So we'll talk about stereotypes and stuff later in this podcast, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that I was coming from a space as a woman that did not take money for her pregnancy.
So good to know. I didn't even know that going into it. I kind of just assumed because, as an adoptive mom who had seen situations when we were awaiting family, I always saw the expected expense amount and I never saw any that didn't have it. So I
Mm-hmm.
just assumed this was just a part of every single domestic adoption, especially domestic infant adoption, obviously. And so, anyway, that's super helpful to know. And this podcast was actually birthed out of a conversation that Ashley and I have been having for really a couple of weeks now, because I had some questions about expectant mother expenses. And I was like, who can I ask? And then I was like, oh, Ashley. And she was so knowledgeable and so helpful that I was like, Ashley, this needs to be a podcast. And we now have like weeks worth of voice text recorded. We probably could have just made a podcast out of them.
Seriously.
But
For sure.
yeah. But hey, we're here now. So hopefully, we can just recreate it all and then some. So, first off, I just want to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that we are calling these expectant mother and really expectant parent, because obviously there is the potential that a father is in the picture as well. But for the most part, it's obviously expectant mother expenses, because that's what they are. I know we talk about this all the time, but it definitely needs to be consistently said that a woman who's pregnant and considering adoption for her child is not a birth mother yet. So a lot of times you see this talked about and it's called birth mother expenses. But that term really should only be used post placement. So hopeful adoptive parents need to understand going into this conversation that there is a high risk when it comes to paying expectant mother expenses, because she very well may decide to parent her child, and that is her right. Like, she deserves that. And if that is the case, you will most likely lose the money. But that's just a part of the process. And adoption is risky. It's emotionally risky. It's financially risky. But to me, I had to really think about it in a certain way. When we were a hopeful adoptive family, I had to change my mindset and think about the fact that the least that we could do to help a mother who had chosen us to potentially raise her baby, the least we could do was to give her a little bit of financial assistance to help her through a hard time as she was considering placing her baby. So, if there was anything we could do to help ensure that she would have a roof over her head, food on the table, just less stress in a hard time, that was worth it to me. And even if we only ever had the opportunity to just walk with her through her pregnancy and the adoption never even happened, we would still be able to feel good about the fact that we helped her out. And her baby too. So, anyway, Ashley, if you want to take it from here, you can kind of get the conversation started.
Yes, I just want to echo a little bit of what Macy was just talking about. I'm such an advocate. Obviously, our lane is post-placement care, but I'm such an advocate for educating hopeful adoptive parents in the season of wait. And I think that the more we can understand the roles, rights, and responsibilities and how that kind of shifts from the time that the biological parents have the parental rights and to when that shifts to the adoptive parents having the parental rights, what a difference that time makes. And if we can understand that as hopeful adoptive parents, your role in the wait is to support the biological parents 100%. It's easy to get caught up in your hypothetical that there might be a baby, that the end game is the baby, right? But right now you're caught up in your checklists and your homesteading, your paperwork, and you're writing the checks to the agencies and talking with your consultants and crying in an empty nursery and all these things, and not to make light of any of those things. But at the end of the day, this season is really not about you. It's about the pregnant mothers and potentially fathers, but I am going to speak to the mothers specifically in this podcast, that it's about the pregnant mothers trying to decide what is best for her child. And you don't get to walk into this with the expectation that your paycheck is guaranteeing a result of a child. No, that does not feel awesome. And that is a big risk to take. But if we can really keep perspective about what this is about long term, I promise if you can do that season of wait well, this will be so much better on the other end when that power shifts and you're parenting this child and navigating this beautiful open adoption relationship. You don't want to be the couple that walks out of the hospital feeling like that mother was completely uneducated, unsupported, unempowered to make the best decision that she felt was right for her and her child, not what everyone else was saying was right. And these things, like supporting her with these expenses, is it's just part of the gig, right? Like, you just have to know that if you are chosen to walk through this season, this pregnancy season with her, that it is about walking with her, not about walking with her with the expectation of a baby. And that is a big statement to wrap your mind around, but that's the reality of what this time looks like for you. And so we want to do that better. And so you need to understand that we still have a choice in this, that I am considering my options until I put pen to paper, until this is finalized, until I terminate my parental rights. I'm still figuring it out. And there is no guarantee, and there is no amount of money that you can pay that's going to guarantee that at the end of the day that, you know what, I might think that parenting is still the best option. That doesn't mean I was intentionally trying to scam you. It doesn't mean that I took your money with this vindictive mindset that I'm going to keep this baby no matter what. It's not about that. It's about me literally being in the most overwhelming, impossible place. And then, like, in the 2-minute warning, trying to make the best decision possible. And so you have to understand that none of this is personal, even though this is so personal to you. And agencies are going to offer promises of you being able to recoup to try and ease, your moral dilemma about the kind of financial risk that you're taking. What that could potentially look like, though, is in contract for the expectant mother to say, if you choose to parent, you have to pay back all of your expenses. I have to tell you, one of the number one reasons that we choose to place our children for adoption is financial crisis. It is coercion to say, you are coming to me because you are in such desperate financial crisis, but if you take all of this money, you have to pay it back if you parent. Well, we're not going to feel like we have a choice. We're going to feel like we have to place. And so I think all of these conversations are so important, and understanding that this is about walking her through the pregnancy season and supporting her, not the end game of a baby, is going to be just mind blowing for how you can do this well.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I was reading the book, The Girls Who Went Away, which I know, Ashley, you've read it. I'm not sure if
Yes.
you have yet, Amy. But highly, highly recommend that book. It's not an easy read. It's a very heartbreaking read.
Yes, it is.
But I think it's necessary. And I remember, so basically, this book is the stories of tons of women who are birth mothers who place their babies for adoption or relinquish their babies for adoption during the baby scoop era. Some of them basically against their will. It was a whole different ball game back then. But a lot of them talked about how when they would give birth and they would see their babies, if they were even allowed to see their babies, if they wanted to parent, this is what the hospital, the doctor, the social worker, the nuns, whoever's care they were in, would tell them all the time was, well, then you're going to have to pay all this money back. And a lot of times these are like 17-year-old girls. And so anyway, it's so wild. That's when I read that book and I saw where kind of domestic infant adoption started and all of the coercive tactics that were used back then, it made so much more sense to me why so many of these things today are so screwed up and are so messy. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's so messy and it's so hard. And, Ashley, one thing, and Amy, you can weigh in on this too, but I know there have to be some people listening who have had the thought, yeah. But can't anyone just say that they want to place their baby so they can receive financial support, but, never actually intend on placing? And obviously, this is tough. Like, you don't know what's inside someone's heart. You don't know their intentions. Obviously, we understand there are financial scammers out there. What do you guys think about
I
that? What
mean,
are your
my thought
thoughts?
is the answer to your question, I guess, or the thought, can there be, is this, I mean, yes, there are people who could go through a complete financial adoption scam and you lose all of that money and they never had the intention to, place their child for adoption. But going back to what you said earlier, adoption is risky and it's risky on so many levels. So you do have to really, trust your agency or go with an agency, I guess, that you do trust. Press into them, ask hard questions, make sure that the pregnancy has been verified. But yeah, there really is no way to really know, and that's kind of part of it. And that is a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, and I want to speak to the other side of that though. Like, I absolutely agree that there's just no way to know. But I mean, we walk in human relationships that are unknown and are high risk all the time. I mean, look at the divorce rates alone in this country. Come on, like
100% agree. Yeah,
this is
that's why.
yeah, this is life and this is part of it. And if adoption becomes the path that you choose to pursue, then it comes with some of that unknown risk. But speaking to the other side of it, yes, there are scammers. Yes, I have seen people scammed emotionally where they didn't take a dime and they just dragged them on and played with their emotions for months. Like, what's worse? I don't know. I mean,
Oh, yeah, that happened to us.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, it's equally as painful. So is it unavoidable? No, unfortunately, it's not. But that's the world that we live in. But what I really hope that hopeful adoptive parents and anyone else that's listening that has been through any of this can understand too that a lot of the demographic of these mothers are repeating these cycles because that's what they know. We're products of our environment, right? And so if a woman gets pregnant and she knows without a doubt that for the 9 months of her pregnancy, she has a roof over her head, she has food in her belly, maybe she has other kids that she's parenting, that she's taking care of, that they're not going to starve, that they're going to get any kind of medical help that they're going to need, that they're not going to sit in a room with their power shut off. Like,
Mm.
these are circumstances that exist in this nation. And when women are pregnant and consider adoption and go to an agency and get that kind of support, yes, are the that is a powerful thing to be able to support these women. The question that we need to be asking is, are we enabling the cycles to repeat? Okay. And
Mm.
this comes down to, are the agencies offering long-term support and resources that can help women break cycles versus enable cycles? Okay. Now, this is a huge loaded question because we're not even getting into conversation about whether the women will or will not take advantage of the resources provided. Because I know there's a lot of agencies that do things like this really well, and women just aren't in a space or will never be in a space to take advantage of that. Okay. And so you can't save them all, right? But are
Right.
we offering education around birth control? Are we providing resources for them to go and get it? Are we offering financial classes and budgeting classes? Are we providing resume building and interviewing skills? What are they doing to provide resources to help them rebuild a life? Everyone talks about, oh, you got a second chance at life. Well, guess what? For some of these women, literally this specific pregnancy literally might be the smallest fire that they're putting out in their existence. Okay. So they don't just all of a sudden, rarely do the women just all of a sudden get pregnant and then all of a sudden they're homeless and all of a sudden they can't pay their bills and all of a sudden they're in this huge financial crisis. A lot of those things already existed, and this is just another one of those outward consequences of all of these underlying issues that we are refusing to acknowledge. And these cycles will continue to repeat if we are not putting proper resources in place to help them actually rebuild instead of set them up for failure.
Seriously, I love it. You're preaching. I did want to also circle back around really quick before we move on. Okay, so obviously we've said this before, but we're not adoption professionals. But I do know a lot of people who are like connected to adoption somehow. And people just doing this to run some kind of financial scam is not something that I hear about frequently. I'm sure you two could speak to that as well. But that is not the norm. This is not who we're typically talking about by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, yeah, there's scammers out there, and yeah, there's professionals that do things to just be really crappy. But I think in general, people are really just trying to figure this out and do the best they
Exactly.
can to help and serve families and serve these pregnant women. And this is just part of the ugliness of the society that we live in, not exclusive to adoption, just to screw over a bunch of people.
Yeah, for sure. Ashley, when you were talking about the repeating cycles and how sometimes these are the only times when these women are cared for, it made me think about how in so many cities, there are amazing pregnancy resource centers that do offer so much support, both, before the baby's born, for a woman throughout her pregnancy, even like helping her get childcare and all the stuff she would need to parent. And obviously, they can't solve all of life's problems or stresses, but I wonder how different the picture and the whole world of adoption would be if agencies were first off saying, okay, before you make an adoption plan, have you looked into all of these other avenues, all these other places that are out there that can help you, that can support you, that can help you get meals, can help you find free childcare? I just can't help but wonder how different it would be. And sadly, I mean, it sounds horrible to say because it is horrible, but I'm sure most agencies don't do that because it would be bad for business, which, like, how disgusting. But I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, nationally, that's not like a great marketing tool to
Right.
use.
Exactly.
Um, and again, this is, when we're having these conversations, we're speaking in general terms, right? I know amazing agencies that offer parenting classes and that provide resources and all of these things. And we hear these conversations, when you're talking about fundraising, well, why don't you just give the mom all this money to parent? And I'm like, yeah, throwing 60 grand at a woman who's been in financial crisis for more than half of her life isn't going to be the answer, because that's not going to accomplish anything. If she doesn't know how to manage that kind of money, if she doesn't
Mm,
know how to invest it, if she doesn't know how to budget every single month, that money's going to be gone in a second and you haven't accomplished anything but wasted 60 grand. So that's not the answer either.
Right.
mm.
Well, I do want to get into talking about agencies, but before we go there, I feel like it's worth talking for just a second to the hopeful adoptive families or people who are considering adoption. So, if you're going through the adoption process or you're going to enter into it, hopefully you've already had this conversation with your spouse if you're married or whatnot, but to figure out what you are able to spend or are willing to spend on an adoption. Obviously, sometimes adoption requires fundraising or writing grants, things of the sort. However, hopefully you have a ballpark idea of what you feel like is even within your realm of expenses. I know that's something that Charlie and I did with our first adoption before we adopted. We just talked about, okay, financially, what do we feel like is even possible? And I remember one specific situation that we said no to because we knew we just could not afford it. There was no way we were going to pull that kind of money together. Even though, we would have loved to adopt the child, I'm sure it just wasn't possible. So what we don't want to do is to say yes to a situation that we can't actually afford these expectant mother expenses, 2 months in, because you don't want to walk with an expectant mom for months and then you decide, man, I can't keep paying this, and it either devastate her, or let's say that she makes a different plan and she decides to parent or even place the child with someone else. You don't want to be totally devastated financially either, where you couldn't move ahead with pursuing another adoption plan. So I don't know if that's worth having more conversation on or not, but it is something to consider just before you say yes to something that you're not really prepared for.
I think it definitely takes the emotion out of it when you are a hopeful adoptive parent and you see that a situation came to your inbox and you read through the whole thing and you're so emotionally attached and you're like, oh my gosh, I need to say yes to this. And then you see the number at the bottom and it is way more than you know you can do, but you're already emotionally attached. So, yeah, I think if you kind of have that number in your mind on the front end, then it sort of takes the pressure off a little bit.
So I just want to touch on that. You guys are talking about, information that's coming from the agencies and saying yes or no to certain things. I know it's not easy to say no when we're so excited about finally bringing a baby home and all these things. You want to say yes to everything. And so I think it's actually really powerful when you can take a step back and be realistic about your circumstance. Now, I want you guys to know that I am aware that, and I always get so emotional when I talk about this, is I am aware that I have not had to be on the side of investing so much money and so much risk into bringing home a child. For whatever reason, I was able to carry three beautiful babies to full term and deliver. I've had the incredible honor of parenting my two children with my husband and have an open adoption relationship with my son that I placed. That's not ever lost on me that there's so many people that I love and care about that will never have that opportunity. So I'm definitely not speaking from a person that had to take that kind of financial risk, but I am speaking from a person that chose someone else who was willing to take that risk with me. And I hate this conversation because I believe so deeply and passionately that these open adoption relationships are relational and not transactional, and the money makes it feel like such a transaction. But there are things that we can do and things that we can ask to make sure that in this very short temporary season, we can do this well so that we can quickly close this piece out and really move into what matters in adoption, and that's the relationships. And when this is all said and done, I don't mean to say this casually, but it's
Yeah.
just money. Like I don't want to make it like I know how much time people save and fundraise and stress over the money. I mean, my husband and I stress about money. I mean, we live paycheck to paycheck just like half of America.
Right.
So like I know that it's not just money, but at the end of the day, when we can really focus on the relational piece of adoption and not have to focus on the money piece, that's really like where the gravy is. It's so much better on that side of it. But there's definitely questions that need to be asked to agencies to make sure that you can do this better. And so I'm just going to share some of those with you, and I would love any feedback from you guys that you want to share. But these are things that I think are very important that keep things kind of on the more ethical track. I just wanted to say, we get into this ethical versus legal conversation, and there's such a huge need for law reform, but most agencies are going to work within the law. They might stretch it a little and they might find a loophole here and there, but most licensed child placing agencies are going to work within the law of their state, even if we think it's unethical. Okay, so that would look like, for example, if the state of Ohio, for example, has a expectant parent expense cap of 3,000, you're going to have one agency that is doing what they're supposed to, which means they're going to give you an exact breakdown of what the expenses are. They're going to pay directly to the utility departments. They're going to pay it to the phone bill companies. They're going to pay it to the grocery stores. They're going to pay it to the landlords. And you're going to have an exact breakdown of what the cost was and exactly where it's being paid to. They're going to have receipts to show the court, and they're within that 3,000. You're going to have another agency in the same state under the same law that's going to say, here's a $2,000 check. You have another $1,000 waiting for you when you deliver. Okay. That's super gross and unethical, but have stretched the law still within that $3,000 legal limit. They're just handling it in a completely different way. That is the difference between what looks ethical versus what looks legal. Okay. And so you need to know what that looks like. Are we giving cash? Are we giving lump sums? Are we giving like referral discounts if you bring your pregnant friend? All of those kinds of things that we.
Is that a thing?
That is totally a thing.
Oh my.
I laugh because if I don't laugh, then I just want to throw up on everybody. But
exactly.
you guys, money is a powerful motivator for women that live in financial crisis. And there are agencies that prey on the vulnerable. You guys see it from the adoptive parent side. Come on.
Oh, yeah.
They prey on your vulnerability of your desire to have a child. They prey on our need for financial support. So, for example, and another thing, questions that you want to ask, hopeful adoptive parents talk all the time about how expensive adoption is, because it can range nationally anywhere from 20,000 up to 75,000. Okay. But some of the most ethical and wonderful agencies that I know are some of the most expensive in the nation. And people come to me all the time and they're like, you refer me to these agencies and telling me how ethical they are, and this adoption is going to cost me $65,000. How is that ethical? And my response to that 100% of the time is, first of all, what state do they live in? Because you have to understand the expectant parent expense. You have to understand the demographic of where this agency is located. Okay, so we're looking at homelessness. We're looking at addiction issues. We're looking at prostitution. We're looking at all of these things to say, if a woman comes to an agency and she's pregnant and she comes at 10 weeks and she is homeless, you can bet your butt that agency is going to put a roof over her head for her entire pregnancy. You'll never convince me that that's unethical. Is that going to make your adoption more expensive? Of course it is. You're paying living expenses for 9 straight months. It's a lot of money. But that woman is cared for 9 straight months, and that agency is not going to turn them away. I would rather that than have an agency fly them out 2 weeks out of state, across country, where they have no support, no family, no knowledge of the doctors they're working with, 2 weeks before delivery, and say, come here, we'll give you a car and put you up in housing, and then when the baby's done, you can go home. Pay for 9 months versus that. Just because don't look for the cheaper out in adoption, because a lot of times the cheaper out is more unethical than the more expensive.
Yeah. So true. I feel like this is why we need to be equipped with knowing what kinds of questions to ask agencies going in, which is obviously a whole different conversation, but this is just a prime example of that. So, like, Ashley, you mentioned the agencies flying them out of state. Can you explain that for people who have never heard of this, kind of what that entails?
Sure. So a lot of times what'll happen is, because the internet has created opportunity for us to connect anywhere in the nation, right? So when a pregnant mother is looking and Google's like, give up my child or adoption or whatever, I'm pregnant, need help or whatever, they will be connected with agencies all over the nation. Now, granted, most of the time, they're going to find the agencies that have the highest Google ad clicks, right? So whatever agency invests the most in Google ads are going to be the first hits. Okay. I mean, it works that way in the internet, no matter
Sure.
the industry. Okay. So I'm going to find these agencies that pay the most for Google ads. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to their website and I'm going to make the assumption that because I found them in my Google search, let's say I live in Missouri and I find this agency that's in Utah. Okay. Utah has a national reputation for flying women in. Utah is an adoption friendly state, which means they favor the adoptive families. Okay. So I find this website, I find this agency in Utah, and I'm like, you can offer me expenses. Like, what does this look like? So, for the agency to be able to legally work within their ICPC, within going around birth father rights, their expenses, everything that they're legally, again, legal versus ethical, everything that they're legally allowed to do, it's more beneficial for them to fly the women into this state than have to work over two state lines. Okay. So we're just going to fly you in and bring you in and have you deliver here. And we've already got a doctor here and we've got housing for you and we've already got this stuff set up. We're going to fly you first class. Come on out. Okay. What happens is technically that's illegal because they're really only licensed to work within the state that they're licensed in. Not some agencies are licensed in more states, but most are licensed within the state that they are in. Okay. So now we're trying to avoid ICPC for multiple states. Again, the birth father rights in Utah, women can relinquish their rights without biological father relinquishment. There's just a lot of things that they can get around in the state of Utah because it's an adoption friendly state. There's so many things about that. And then on the other end, if again, kind of like we talked about earlier with repaying, expenses, if you decide to parent, then it looks like you and your newborn, we fly you in first class and treat you like, royalty and all of these things when you're here. But if you decide to parent, we're sending you and your newborn home on a Greyhound bus, or we're not sending you home at all, and you have to now leave the housing 6 weeks after, and you're on your own.
Wow. Hmm.
Ugh, breaks my heart. It's so awful.
I
Yeah.
feel like this could be an all skate with all three of us. We could just kind of bounce this back and forth. But what are some practical questions that we would encourage someone who's looking into adoption agencies to ask the agency before they decide to go with them? Like, for example, something I was thinking of is like, how do they handle the money? Do they just give cash directly to an expectant mom? Or are they, like you mentioned earlier, do they pay the bills directly? Do they keep the receipts? Is there a transparent breakdown to the expectant parent so they know what to expect? Like, would they have to pay back? What are some practical kind of questions that you guys would recommend people asking?
I think a big, huge one is
Yeah,
medical expenses. If the mother is on Medicaid, which a lot are, why are you getting charged 10 grand for hospital and medical expenses if the agencies can bill Medicaid? What does that
right. That's
breakdown
good.
look like? I think that's a big one.
That's good. Something else I think you
Yeah.
could ask is, what are you offering to help prevent this expectant mother from repeating the cycle like you had mentioned earlier, Ashley? Are we offering education on birth control, financial classes? Maybe you don't even have to just say, do you offer financial classes? They say yes. Feel free to probe. Okay, what does that look like? Can she meet with a financial counselor? You can ask probing questions. I think sometimes it's easy to feel like, as a hopeful adoptive parent, that we don't have permission to ask questions, but we really do. I mean, anyone, an expectant mother, anybody involved, we have permission to ask questions and receive answers. And if you don't get the answers that you're looking for, keep going till you find the ones that you are hoping to hear.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions that we made a list of questions that we think all hopeful adoptive parents should ask. And we even work with agencies that have this on their frequently asked question page on their site. I'm going to share some of these with you, but I'm here to tell you if they stumble around or refuse to answer your questions, go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Even if it's an agency that has been referred to you by someone like me or someone like AdoptWell, like
right.
if you have these questions and you're asking them and they will not give you transparent answers, it's a red flag. Okay, there's no reason why agencies shouldn't be able to answer questions like, may I have a detailed breakdown of adoption expenses? Will you break down what is covered in the agency fee? Why is there a matching fee? How much of the money I pay is at risk if a mother or father chooses to parent? Are medical expenses being covered by Medicaid or insurance? What medical expenses will I be responsible for? How much is being spent on expectant parent expenses? How are they being paid? Are they given a lump sum at any point? What is involved in paying for therapy resources pre and post placement? Is that cost on me? Is it my responsibility to find those post placement? How many weeks after delivery are we still providing for these parents or families after they place? All sorts of these kinds of questions. If for any reason you get a no, and I'll make sure that Amy and Macy link this list of questions too if you want to look over it. But if you are talking to an agency and they won't give you a transparent answer, go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's so true. The hopeful adoptive parents truly hold the power. And so it's such a big responsibility. And I feel like that's why we need to be equipped on the front end because we just don't know what questions to ask. We don't know what things are red flags. Even earlier, when you were talking about the adoption friendly states, I will be the very first one to admit that when I first started the adoption process and I knew literally nothing, when someone told me about, oh, that's cool, that's an adoption friendly state, I didn't even think a thing of it. I was like, oh,
Yeah,
cool,
it
Yeah.
sounds so
that's
nice.
good. You just don't even know there are things that have been twisted to sound good that aren't good. And there's just a lot that goes into it.
And we've been talking a lot about the agencies and questions you should ask and the high risk and everything, but I want to bring it back to the mothers. At the end of the day, this conversation is about understanding the responsibility to walk with the mothers during this season of pregnancy. And that whether that results in you having a baby in your home or not, this is about supporting them while they are considering all of their options. And one of the best ways for them to have clarity and make the best educated decision is if all of the other fires are on pause for a minute so that they don't have to stress about finances. They don't have to worry about whether they're sleeping behind this dumpster or if they can get into this shelter this night. Like, it's about saying, we're going to take care of all of your other fires so that you can do nothing but focus on this pregnancy, that you can educate yourself on what you want to do, that we can make sure that this baby stays as healthy as possible while you make this decision. So the agencies and the fees that you pay are allowing the fires to be put out for a very brief amount of time so that she can get this figured out during this season of pregnancy. That's what the expenses are for.
And worth
Yes,
every penny.
I agree.
exactly. I agree too. And I just think ultimately we have to remember as hopeful adoptive parents, yes, it's hard. Yes, it's risky, but this is not just about us. Like you said earlier, Ashley, so many other stories are being written here, not just our own. And it will help us have a better attitude about the whole thing if we can just be like, you know what, I'm just going to love the person that's in front of me right now well, regardless of the outcome. I'm going to love well. I'm going to be generous. I'm going to do everything that I can to help her through a hard time. And ultimately, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But our mentality going into it can change the whole game.
Something that I've just really kind of had burning inside of me lately is, and I don't want this to sound condemning in the least, but I think it's worth thinking about, is when I do see people fundraising for adoption, which I understand that you have to do sometimes because things happen that aren't expected. But the whole term of like bring home baby B or bring home baby whatever when you're raising money for adoption, it always has just kind of pained me a little bit because we're really doing so much more than that when this money that you're paying for adoption is really going to a lot more than just bringing home a baby. because you really are, most of the time, at least the situations that I've been familiar with, you really are hopefully kind of, just like you said, Ashley, maybe putting a roof over a head, relieving some hunger. You're filling in, you're bridging a gap that hasn't been bridged for this person yet. And so when you're raising money and you're paying these fees that seem like they keep coming up, you're really doing a lot more than just bringing home a baby, even though that in and of itself sounds like such a sweet thing.
Well, I think that's where we get back to the relational versus transactional. If you're only going to make it about money, it's always going to suck. It's always going to feel ugly. It's always going to feel unethical. But if you remember the people that are involved in this transaction, you're going to remember the relationship behind it, and what you're actually doing isn't just about the end game, that there's so many other things taking place and so many ways that you're caring for these mothers. And I don't think you can put a price on that. Like, I understand that not everybody has that kind of cash laying around. I know I don't. But at the end of the day, it's about the people involved. And long term, again, I know because I've heard it from countless adoptive parents that 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, it was just money.
Yeah.
And it's about those sweet relationships.
So true. Well, thank you guys so much for just sharing your insight. Hopefully, this was helpful for our listeners. I know I've learned so much from you guys, and it's a tough conversation to have, but very, very necessary. So I'm really, really glad we got to do it. Is there anything else you guys would like to add?
No, I just appreciate people leaning in and seeing from the other perspective, that this is more than just a coercion tactic, that this is life for these women, and that it's worth having a conversation about.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one more practical thing.
Go for it.
So, just super practically speaking, when you have been chosen by an expectant mother, you can set up a legal risk call with an attorney, and an attorney can really lay out for you kind of what the financial risk would look like, so that if the expectant mom does decide to parent or move forward, you would know kind of what it would look like if she chooses to do that financially, which I would recommend having a legal risk call, so that you do have in mind really what to expect coming down the pipe. Also, if you are chosen, and you begin paying expenses to the expectant mother, you should definitely get an attorney or agency involved and not just pay her directly.
We've been talking about, all the questions to ask your agencies and things that are legal versus ethical and things that you should be doing. I did want to add in here in this part of this conversation that it is unethical for you to pay these mothers directly. Okay, so this word of coercion comes up a lot, and we're talking about that you're buying a baby. You guys, a lot of times the mothers don't even know that the money's coming from the hopeful adoptive families. They really think that they're going to this agency and this agency has this money and that they're supporting them. When you want to talk about unethical behavior and buying a baby, see what it looks like when you start paying these women directly. Okay, it should always go through the licensed agencies, the lawyers, the professionals. It should never be given directly. It's going to come across as a bribe, as a coercive. And on the other side, you think that if you give this money that you deserve a baby. Well, she's going to think that if she doesn't give you a baby because you gave her this money, that there's going to be an issue. Just always use the licensed professionals to handle that for you, and it will eliminate so much of the coercive behavior.
Yes, so true. Well, friends, we're so glad you joined us for another episode. If you're interested in the list of questions to ask an agency, we've linked them in the show notes. We hope this has been helpful for you, and we'd be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. You can find us on social media at AdoptWell, and check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we all learn together how we can adopt well.